We're here for another one of your questions about work. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. And we try to have questions here that are as widely applicable to as many people as possible, because the real idea here is a reference guide built piece by piece through these conversations on how to work. And Harry, like, I had met you long after I'd first started hearing about you, because the way I'd heard about you was through your, I don't know if it's not an alter ego because it is yourself, but your presence on the internet as the rideshare guy who, in the rise of app-based, for folks who don't know Harry Campbell, in the rise of app-based work and starting with Uber and Lyft in particular, Harry became this driver's ally who is explaining to people how to use these services as drivers. And so, Harry, I'll let you tell your story about how you got into all that. But the core question we have today is, if I'm a person who's just trying to make some extra money and trying to figure out, like, of all these different gig jobs, what do I do to actually make some extra money? How should I think about that? Would love any and all insight that you have, and just thank you. Thank you for all the stuff you've done and being here now.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate it. And I think when you've been doing something for 8 or 9 years, day in and day out, people, whether they like it or not, keep hearing about you. So hopefully it was mainly in a good context. So you kept
Yeah, it
seeing
was like, this is useful.
Harry
Actually,
and
I
the
think it might
rideshare
have been
guy.
somebody at Uber being like, look, we don't know how drivers are going to respond to this, but we have this guy who we ask, and he seems to be a pretty good bellwether for what drivers may think about something. That was sort of it.
Definitely. Well, that's sort of always the viewpoint that I've taken. Definitely, I mean, there's a lot of positives and negatives to the gig economy and driving for Uber and Lyft specifically, but I definitely feel personally that the positives more than outweigh the negatives, and that's why I do what I do. That's why I've started my business, and that's also why I started driving for Uber and Lyft all the way back in 2014. At the time, I was actually an aerospace engineer for Boeing, so kind of doing the opposite of what I do now. But I started driving for Uber and Lyft on the side, really just to check it out, to try it out, and see what it was like to make some money. And I think that's one of the nice things about the gig economy, is that there isn't a huge barrier to entry and you can try it out. And really from day one, you're going to be making money. You may not make as much as you want, or it may not be the greatest experience, but there's a low barrier to entry, there's low risk, and you can get started and, try things out pretty easily. So that's sort of what I've always been a big proponent
And
of
can I
the
ask,
gig
how
economy
many I don't know how you measure this, but how many people have you encouraged into the gig occupations, or, like, what's the right way to measure the scale of your impact?
Well, I think for a while there, I joked that I had probably talked to, over 50,000 gig workers, in-person interviews, social media, emails, and that's over 8 years. So, when you
That's
average it out, it's
wild.
actually not that many.
But still,
But
that's a lot of total
yeah.
wisdom accumulated.
Exactly. And I mean, I've driven for Uber and Lyft, I've delivered food for DoorDash and Postmates, and I've charged scooters for Bird. And, now, we've got a team of contributors across the country that are trying everything. Our most popular video on YouTube is actually all about truck driving with 6 million views. So, we cover anything that moves, but definitely best known for driving for Uber and Lyft. And also, last mile delivery, I guess you would say, since over the past 3 years, we've seen this explosion during COVID of food delivery services, grocery delivery services, weed delivery services, alcohol, fast delivery, you really name it, everything and anything is getting delivered and people want it faster. So that creates some really interesting work opportunities for, those that want to, get a little side money or do even more in the gig economy.
And so if I'm a person who wants to earn a little extra money in one of these, as you put it, like low barrier to entry kind of occupations, or, or lines of work, I don't even know if occupation is the right way to put it. How should I think about it? What should I do?
Well, I've always been partial to rideshare. I think that driving people, driving for Uber and Lyft is how you can make the most amount of money. And, I mean, I guess the simple way of putting it is people will pay more for a ride for themselves than they will for their burrito. I think that, when it comes to food delivery, it's probably a much easier job. You're not dealing with people. You go and pick up a, hamburger or burrito or something and then drop it off at the customer. It's pretty hard to mess it up. People do sometimes still mess it up. But, I think that income reflects that, right? That you have a lot of alternatives as a customer when it comes to food delivery. You could order in, you could cook your own food, you could do groceries, you could not eat, you could have leftovers, right? Whereas when you're at the bar on a Friday night, you're willing, and you have to get home,
you're
willing
to
pay
home.
What it takes. Yeah, you're willing to pay what it takes for an Uber or Lyft. And the driver, typically makes a large percentage of that fare. And, sometimes drivers often complain that Uber and Lyft take too much of each individual fare. But, typically the more that the passenger pays, you do get an overwhelming majority of that percentage of the fare. So, when fares go up, you make more money as a driver.
And so if somebody's thinking to themselves, then how do I maximize my earnings per hour? Then you're saying that being a driver of humans is
Yeah.
almost always a better thing than being a driver of burritos.
Yep.
Um, what, just out of curiosity, then, why do people drive for burritos?
Well, the nice thing about doing food delivery is frankly, it's easier, right? You might only
Yeah,
do 1 or 2 deliveries per hour. You don't need the same type of vehicle. There are a lot of folks that are doing it these days on e-bikes in places like San Francisco and New York City, even
so
scooters.
more accessible.
More accessible, lower barrier to entry. You can be younger. You actually, you can be 18, for example, to do food delivery. You can deliver as a team, with a partner, a spouse, a friend, a kid. So
Yeah,
there are a lot, of interesting combinations you can do when it comes to food delivery. And frankly, there are, when it comes to rides, it's really Uber and Lyft are sort of the main two options. And when it comes to food delivery, there's Uber Eats, there's DoorDash. You can go into grocery delivery, into Instacart. You can deliver packages for Amazon Flex or Walmart Spark or companies like Point Pickup. You can do
there's
construction
lots of
materials for
choices.
Curry. Yeah, I could go on and on, right?
And
It'd
I
be a
guess
fun
I've heard
day.
about some things in only a few places in the U.S. at least, like
Yeah,
driver co-op that are driver owned, and they may
yeah.
have, or driver, at least drivers get more of a share of the economics. I'm not precisely sure exactly
Mhm.
how it works, but it seems to have. So let me ask one question about ride sharing, and then we can broaden a little bit. For, or for people who are worried about, like, read the stories about, like, well, but when you factor in gas and the cost of the
Yeah,
car and insurance, I might not be making much money at all after all that. How do you think about that? Does that have to do with where you drive or when you drive, or
yeah.
what's the right way to think about that?
So that's definitely a fair criticism. And, what we see with a lot of people is that, a lot of drivers, if you're able to figure it out, you can kind of make it in the gig economy and stick around for many years. But a lot of people do end up quitting, right? Because either the type times and places that they want to work, maybe they can only work during the day when it's not as busy. So they're not maximizing their top dollar and they've got a big expensive car that sucks up a lot of gas. You're probably, when you look at your net profit margin, you're probably not operating on a huge margin there. Whereas if you're earning top dollar and then your expenses are very low, you got a great deal on a 2 to 3 year old used Prius and you get great gas mileage, then you might be looking a lot better. So you do have to think about your income and expenses. And that's one of the reasons why, the gig economy, I think it's great for everyone to try it out, but it's not for everyone. You really have to kind of understand. And one of the biggest things and kind of the aspects that I like most is if that what you're doing, if you strategize and really think about when and where you're driving, you can earn a lot more than the top driver, or you can earn a lot more than the average driver if you're one of the top drivers. And you have to think about that income and expenses. And it is great practice for running your own business too. So I think that's a lot of positives. But you definitely, it's not for everyone.
Yeah, I definitely think that the companies, Uber and Lyft in particular, kind of took the be an entrepreneur uh,
Yeah.
frame a little far, in the sense that it's, you learn some skills and obviously you're working
Yeah.
for yourself. So in that sense, but as a pathway to entrepreneurship, it may or may not, work for people and doesn't necessarily offer anything. The thing that's very interesting to one thing that's very interesting to me about your story is that you obviously could have done lots of other things with a few spare hours.
Yeah.
You could have gone on Upwork or some other gig platform that was
Yeah.
information work. We're investors in this company called Ask Wonder, where people
Hmm.
do online research. Um,
Cool.
and so, how do you think about, for an individual, some of these things that do have a barrier to entry, in the sense
Yeah.
that, like, if you want to do software development work on Upwork, you need to know how to code, um, versus more accessible options? Like, how would you
Yeah.
code if somebody came to you and said, "What should I do?" What advice would you give them?
Definitely. Well, I think that you sort of look at it like, for example, you mentioned, right, Uber and Lyft, they tend to overhype the sort of be your own boss and be an entrepreneur. I mean, really, they're sending you all of your leads, right? Or all of your jobs, all of your customers.
Right.
And
You're
but to be
certainly not
honest,
learning the part that's marketing of
yeah,
being an
that's
entrepreneur.
actually the hardest part of running a business for a lot of people, right? Is where do I get clients? I've got a service to offer. How do I get it in
Well
front of
put.
people? And so I think that in that respect, across all of these different, driving for Uber is definitely different than, doing software development on Upwork. But there are a lot of principles of, marketing yourself and running your own business. If you're on Upwork, you're kind of competing with this sea of other people. And on Uber driving, they send you, but you're doing the same thing. But you don't want to rely on just Upwork or just Uber. You probably want to diversify. You want to be driving for Uber and Lyft. So that principle, I think, applies across all of these different areas of gig economy, right? If I'm a software developer, I don't want to just get all of my jobs on Upwork. One client reports me for something that they don't like and they don't want to pay, even though I'm in the right. I get temporarily deactivated deactivated from Upwork and now I can't make money, right? That happens all the time in the gig economy, regardless of the sort of sector and vertical that you're in. So that's sort of the area that I like most. It's about understanding these principles and then applying them, to running your own business or doing your own day job. And definitely, it's going to be tough to be a software developer if you're driving for Uber and Lyft, but that is a lower barrier to entry. So I would think about it like, what skills do I have? What can I lean into? And if it's something, if I'm driving for Uber and Lyft, but I want to start software development, I mean, even for example, Uber has a partnership with Arizona State University that if you hit certain tiers, they'll give you a free education. So, there are some cool, opportunities out there for sure.
Yeah, it's something I wrote about years ago now about kind of things that Uber and Lyft can do to invest in the professional development of their drivers.
Yeah.
And, I think they've taken some steps, but clearly there's a lot more to go. The other thing I just say as a startup guy, and I'm curious if you agree with this, is, there are advantages and disadvantages to working with an established platform versus something new. If something is new, you might have more influence over it as an early participant in it. If the chance as an individual driver, in the absence of some organized Uber driver group that you may join or put together or take form, or somebody who represents a lot of views informally because he's spoken to a lot of folks like you just may not have any voice to change things. Whereas if you're one of the first 15 people to be on the platform for something, you can influence it potentially, and then may also go out of business in a day, which Uber is unlikely to do. And so I'm curious if you think about, like, do folks experiment? Do you recommend that folks experiment with all these new things as they arise? Because it seems like there's a new last mile delivery option like every week. So how do you think about that?
Definitely. Well, what we do see is that, each kind of category is sort of in its own silo. A lot of people, if you listen to Uber, they talk about, oh, we've got rideshare and we've got Eats, but a lot of drivers don't end up going back and forth. They sort of decide, hey, I like driving people, I want to make, they pick a lane and they stick to it, right? And even, we've had drivers tell us, like, if I go and deliver, some stinky food that smells, stinks up my car, and then I get a passenger, they're going to complain, rate me lower. So even logistically, there are some challenges to going back and forth in addition to the sort of personal preference. But, I think that there are a lot of opportunities, and I've sort of always been, I like rideshare, but I'm willing to try other things, right? And the one thing I think we've seen is that, especially in the last mile delivery space, there are new competitors popping up every day. So whenever services are new, opportunity is sort of at its highest. They're paying the biggest bonuses. They're in most demand for supply, right? So they're willing to pay more or give you better bonuses or signing bonuses or whatever it might be. And so I think that concept is important to understand, because if you don't mind trying new things, a new delivery service that pops up, they're probably not going to pay $35 an hour forever, but for maybe 6 months, you could get in and, be one of the first people and learn and have some,
take some
upward
incentive.
mobility. Yeah, take some incentives. And, that's sort of what we've seen. I mean, that's why I started with rideshare. I tried food delivery. I mean, for a while, I was making $40-$50 an hour charging scooters here in LA for Bird and Santa Monica, right? So, any type of gig work, I'm at least willing to explore it. And even for those who do want to sort of upskill and really take it to the next level, you can't do that so much with Uber. With Uber, there's sort of always a ceiling. You can't really build your own business. But I mean, let's look at grocery delivery, for example. If you're delivering for Instacart, there are companies, for example, one that's called Dumpling, that's VC funded, and it actually allows you to build your own grocery delivery business as an individual proprietor. You can sort of recruit your own clients, and something like that, where there are a lot of personal preferences, you can actually build good rapport with your customers, that what type of avocados they like, and they're willing to pay for it, for example, right? So there are platforms out there that are emerging, which I think are cool, that are sort of helping you get to that next level and actually build your business if you want to stay within that kind of workforce.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, like, some of this work is proto VC work, where you're looking around and trying to kind of scan the landscape and say, here's something where there's a moment of opportunity. And, it also seems like even for the established platforms, things aren't static. Prices for Uber and Lyft, as the VC subsidy went away, seem to go up. Maybe drivers are earning more. I actually have no idea, what's happening with them. So I love that attitude of kind of constant learning. It's why there'll be constant need for the rideshare guy. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap?
No, I think that about covers it. I mean, the only other thing, the thing that I like about the gig economy is that low barrier to entry. But what that also means is that, we hear stories from people all the time that, especially early when I started the blog, people, older folks who have been laid off and can't get a job, can't even get an interview. Here they come to Uber, and it's a great work opportunity for them. That's great when you're getting started. But what it also means is that, a lot of other people are going to get hired. So you always kind of have to be thinking about, the next step. Like, hey, if Uber does start to hire more drivers or does start to flood the market,
where will I go?
are quite different from yours. You want to make the most amount of money. They might want to pay you less, right? So it's sort
Yeah.
of thinking about like, what's my next opportunity, right? Not necessarily always relying on the platforms and the companies, using them and sort of learning from them. But at the same time, no one cares more about your money and your business more than you do. So,
Yeah, I
never
love
forget
that
that.
insight. And I mean, I think there's this kind of grand sense of taking your own evolution of your career in your own hands. It would be nice if Uber and Lyft did more, but
Yeah.
for now, like, folks can research other things like truck driving, and you pointed out that your YouTube channel is taken off, and so I'm just
Yeah.
including the link here for people to go take a look.
The
And
grass is always greener on the other side too, right? When we did the truck driving video, it was amazing how many Uber and Lyft drivers said they were thinking about truck driving, how many truck drivers said they were thinking
thing
about
of
Uber
Uber and
and
Lyft.
Lyft
And
driving.
look, and for all of these things, autonomy now takes a role. I mean, a member of
Yeah.
our team just rode in the Cruise self-driving, taxi effectively in San Francisco. So encourage folks to take a look. If people want other questions, the reason we call it This Is Not Advice is despite the fact that Harry is qualified to give advice, in general, I feel like I am not. And I'm just giving my way of thinking about things, and people are going to have to make their own choices based on the data provided. So you can find past questions, and you'll be able to find this one on thisisnotadvice.work. If you prefer audio, you can go to Jam and just go to jam.ai and look for This Is Not Advice, and you can find that there. And then otherwise, Harry, I'm just grateful that you do what you do, and would be happy to have you on as many times as you want, and to be
Cool.
continued.
Thanks for having me on,
Thank
Roy.
you.
Take care.